Brothers and sisters, picture this moment. A small room lit by the glare of cameras, the air thick with whispers of diplomats and the scratch of pens against polished mahogany. On one side of the table sat Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India. On the other, a young African leader carrying the weight of generations. Between them, nothing less than a turning point for the entire continent. That day, a number thundered through the room like a drumbeat: $15 billion. Headlines around the world shouted it. But beneath the noise, something deeper happened. For decades, Africa was told that its role was to borrow, to beg, to accept crumbs disguised as charity. Aid became the leash, debt became the chain. Yet here, for the first time, Burkina Faso declared, "We will not kneel. We will bargain. We will stand." This was not a handout. This was not another poisoned loan. It was a pact of equals oil exchanged for technology, energy, for modernization, sovereignty, for respect. Imagine a farmer who once watered dry soil with sweat, or a student studying by candlelight dreaming of electricity. This agreement was signed in their name. Not for elites, not for empty headlines, but for the people who have carried Africa's burdens for far too long. And yet the question lingers, can this bold gamble truly change the lives of ordinary men and women in Ouagadougou, Kaya, and Bobo Dioulasso? Will it light homes, open factories, and create jobs? Or will it fade into another broken promise buried under corruption and foreign interests? Stay with us, because what unfolded in that room was not only about Burkina Faso. It was about the future of Africa itself, a future that Washington, Paris, and Brussels never wanted to see. A future that India now dares to invest in. Please share if you feel you are one of the first to know about and support President Ibrahim Traoré. And subscribe if you believe the truth matters more than the headlines. The signing itself felt almost theatrical. Flashbulbs cracked across the room, journalists leaned forward, and seasoned diplomats scribbled furiously into their notebooks. But beyond the choreography of international politics, something extraordinary had taken place. Burkina Faso, landlocked, underestimated, often dismissed as fragile, had just signed a $15 billion pact with India. The figure alone was staggering: $15 billion. For a country where farmers in Kaya still water fields by hand and students in Bobo Dioulasso still study by candlelight, this number carried the weight of a century of struggle. But what mattered more than the number was the structure of the deal itself. For once, it was not aid, it was not debt, it was not a gift wrapped in chains. This was direct investment binding two nations together as equals. Let us break it down. $4 billion is allocated to oil extraction and refining, ensuring Burkina Faso no longer exports crude only to buy back expensive refined fuel. For the first time, local facilities will process the oil, adding value inside national borders. $5 billion goes into petrochemicals and energy infrastructure pipelines, storage and processing plants designed to power not only India's needs, but Burkina Faso's own factories and industries. $3 billion is set aside for steel and manufacturing plants. From Ouagadougou to Koudougou, factories will rise to produce rails, machines, and construction materials. Thousands of jobs could be created for welders, engineers, and assembly line workers. $2 billion is committed to defense technology. Unlike the old days of purchasing overpriced scraps from abroad, this fund supports local assembly of rifles, armored vehicles, and communication systems built in Burkina Faso by Burkinabe hands. $1 billion targets agriculture, telecommunications, and training programs, recognizing that sovereignty begins with educated minds and fertile soil. This breakdown tells a story. It is not charity. It is architecture and infrastructure for sovereignty. Oil is not just fuel, it becomes the engine for factories. Steel is not just metal, it becomes the skeleton of a modern economy. Defense is not just weapons, it becomes a guarantee that sovereignty will not be rented from abroad. Across Ouagadougou's markets, ordinary people listen to the news with a mix of hope and suspicion. A taxi driver stuck in midday traffic hears the announcement on his radio. He shakes his head and mutters, "Another deal, another headline." Farmers in Kaya recall decades of promises that vanished into corruption and foreign accounts. Students in Bobo Dioulasso whisper in dormitories asking whether this time will be different. And that skepticism is justified. Too many times grand projects were announced only to collapse. Too many contracts served the interests of foreign investors while leaving ordinary Burkinabe behind. The true test of this pact is not on paper. It is in whether homes will light up, factories will hum, and young graduates will find meaningful work. Still, the symbolism cannot be ignored. For the first time, a West African nation has declared that its natural resources will not only flow outward, but also fuel transformation within. The signature beneath those cameras was not just ink, it was defiance. It was the sound of chains snapping, the kind that bound nations through aid, debt, and dependency. And the world noticed. Western capitals read the headlines and trembled. The pact challenged their decades-long monopoly on African development. It declared to Washington, Paris, and Brussels that Burkina Faso was not begging, it was bargaining. Not pleading, it was partnering. As the cameras clicked and the ink dried, a new narrative began to form. This was not just an oil deal, it was the first blueprint of a sovereign African economy drafted in Ouagadougou and validated in New Delhi. The climax of this story was not the signing itself, but the shockwaves it sent across continents. As the figure of $15 billion flashed across global headlines, the old guardians of power felt something shift beneath their feet. Washington, Paris, Brussels, and even Beijing whispered in corridors of influence. What is Traoré doing? How dare Burkina Faso, small and landlocked, sign a pact of this scale? The outrage was not about the number, it was about the precedent. For decades, Africa was locked into a system where aid and debt were the only tools offered. Aid was never free, it was the leash. Debt was never neutral, it was the chain. And every so-called development project came wrapped in conditions that reinforced dependency. But this deal with India broke that cycle. The speech that followed the signing drove the point home. We will not beg, we will bargain. We will not kneel. We will stand. Those words echoed beyond Ouagadougou. They carried across African capitals where leaders had long balanced between Western donors and their own restless populations. They carried into village squares where people remembered promises unfulfilled. And they carried into Western boardrooms where executives feared that sovereignty might spread like wildfire across the continent. What makes this moment a climax is not just Burkina Faso's defiance, but the sheer symbolism of its choice of partner. India did not arrive with military bases. It did not deliver lectures on governance. It came with factories, power plants, and technology transfer. For once, an African state was not being told to consume, but to produce. The reactions revealed the fault lines of a shifting world. In the West, commentators warned of reckless leadership. Newspapers framed it as a gamble, some even predicting failure and corruption. Yet beneath their criticism lay fear that the dollar's dominance and Europe's hold on African economies might weaken. In China, the surprise was visible. For years, Beijing had positioned itself as Africa's main investor. Now, New Delhi was stepping boldly into the same space, offering a model of partnership that bypassed the West and challenged China's monopoly. Across Africa, the effect was electric. In Bamako, in Dakar, in Accra, citizens asked, if Burkina Faso can do this, why not use leaders who once hesitated to confront Western institutions suddenly saw a roadmap? But there was also caution. Critics within Burkina Faso itself pointed out that investment is not charity. India will expect returns, leverage, and influence. They warned that without vigilance, this pact could become another case of outsiders gaining while locals are left behind. And this is precisely why the tension was so high, because both futures are possible. In Ouagadougou, the symbolism reached its peak when the breakdown of funds was revealed: billions for oil, billions for steel, billions for defense, and billions for agriculture and training. Each category was not just a number, but a statement. For decades, Africa exported crude oil while importing refined fuel. Now, Burkina Faso declared it would climb the ladder of production. For decades, it bought second-hand weapons at inflated prices. Now, it promised to assemble rifles and armored vehicles on its own soil. That is why the reaction from the people themselves was mixed yet powerful. A taxi driver muttered in doubt, farmers questioned whether promises would reach their fields, students wondered if jobs would truly follow. Their skepticism was not cynicism, it was memory. Too many pacts had collapsed into corruption before. And yet hope flickered. For the first time, they could imagine a factory rising nearby, a paycheck arriving steadily, a light bulb glowing in a village that had known only darkness. The high point of this moment, the true climax, is not just that Burkina Faso dared to sign, It is that the pact forced the world to look again at Africa not as a dependent, not as a charity case, but as a partner capable of setting terms. And that perhaps is what made the West tremble most of all. If the signing was the spark, the true measure of this pact lies in its impact on daily life. The question echoing through Ouagadougou's markets and Kaya's farmlands is simple. Will this deal change my life? For ordinary Burkinabe, the consequences will not be judged by headlines or speeches, but by the hum of factories, the glow of streetlights, and the certainty of steady work. On the civil front, the potential is immense. Steel and petrochemical plants mean thousands of jobs, welders, engineers, mechanics, and assembly workers who for decades watched opportunities bypass their towns. Farmers who once toiled with outdated tools may now gain access to modern machinery. Training centers funded under the agreement promise to equip young men and women not just with certificates, but with real skills coding, electrical work, mechanical design that can anchor an economy for decades. If the pact is honored, entire villages could witness their first taste of reliable electricity, transforming nights of candlelight into evenings of study and productivity. But the dangers are equally real. If corruption seeps in, if funds are mismanaged, or if contracts are dominated by foreign bosses with little interest in local empowerment, then this dream can collapse. Burkina Faso has seen such betrayals before, deals signed with fanfare that delivered little more than disappointment. That memory hangs heavy, shaping both skepticism and vigilance among the people. Politically, the pact reshapes the balance of power inside the country. Success would solidify President Ibrahim Traoré's leadership, giving him not only legitimacy at home, but influence across Africa. Citizens who once doubted a young officer's ability to govern could see him as the architect of a new economic order. Yet failure would be catastrophic. If factories remain idle, if jobs never appear, or if profits vanish overseas, opponents will seize the moment, branding Traoré reckless, unfit, or even dangerous. The deal also redefines sovereignty in a tangible way. By investing $2 billion in defense production, Burkina Faso signals that it no longer wishes to rent its security from abroad. Weapons, vehicles, and communication systems built domestically would not only protect against insurgency, but also mark a psychological break from dependency. For ordinary citizens, seeing "Made in Burkina Faso" stamped on a soldier's rifle or armored vehicle could be a profound source of national pride. And yet sovereignty comes with risk. Critics warn that alignment with India could draw Burkina Faso into new rivalries, whether with China or Pakistan. Here, the political challenge becomes clear. Can the government navigate global competition without compromising its independence? Traoré insists the allegiance is not to blocs, but to the nation itself. Still, in a region scarred by proxy wars and outside manipulation, caution is essential. Perhaps the most significant consequence lies beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Across Africa, leaders and citizens are watching. If the pact delivers jobs, infrastructure, and real independence, it could ignite a continental wave of similar agreements, breaking the old system of aid and dependency. But if it collapses, the failure will be weaponized by critics who argue Africa cannot manage its own destiny. In that sense, the stakes are continental, not just national. For every Burkinabe family, the contract signed under bright lights is now a test in the shadows of daily life. Will it bring the dignity of work, the security of light, the pride of self-reliance, or will it dissolve into another stone in the graveyard of African dreams? The answer lies not in grand speeches, but in the vigilance of the people and the discipline of their leaders. To understand the true weight of this $15 billion pact, we must step outside Burkina Faso and see how the world interprets it. For Washington and its European allies, the deal was not merely an economic contract, it was a direct challenge to the system they built after World War II, a system where the U.S. dollar became the lifeline of global trade, where aid and loans kept African nations tied to Western capitals, and where sovereignty was tolerated only when it remained symbolic. In the U.S., policymakers quickly framed the agreement as high risk. Commentators on major networks warned that Burkina Faso was playing with fire by aligning with India. Yet beneath the cautious language lay something deeper: fear of losing leverage. If a small, landlocked African state could bypass the IMF, World Bank, and Western banks to secure development on its own terms, what would stop Ghana, Senegal, or even Nigeria from doing the same? In Europe, the tone was sharper. Paris, still clinging to influence through the CFA franc and military bases, saw the pact as a dangerous precedent. French analysts worried that if Burkina Faso moved toward trading oil in rupees rather than dollars or euros, the entire monetary chain that tied West Africa to Paris might unravel. Brussels echoed those concerns, pointing to geopolitical instability but revealing an anxiety that Europe's grip on Africa's resources was slipping. China's reaction was more complex. For years, Beijing dominated African infrastructure with its Belt and Road projects. But this pact signaled that New Delhi was stepping into the same arena, offering an alternative model investment without military strings factories instead of ports leased for decades. For China, the competition was unexpected, even unsettling, because it introduced another player capable of reshaping African partnerships. And then there was India itself. For Prime Minister Modi, this was not just about oil, it was about prestige. In a world where India is vying to be recognized as a global power, the partnership with Burkina Faso allows New Delhi to project influence into Africa while presenting itself as the fairer alternative to both the West and China. For India, the deal secures energy for its fast-growing economy. For Burkina Faso, it promises modernization. For the world, it signals that Africa now has multiple suitors and can choose its partners. For ordinary Americans, however, the news is filtered differently. Most see only the headlines of $15 billion gamble in a distant land. Yet, the consequences could reach U.S. households. If Africa begins trading oil and resources outside the dollar system, the financial strength of the U.S. could weaken over time. For retirees, investors, and everyday citizens, that shift matters because it alters the very foundation of America's global economic power. The broader picture is clear. This pact rattles the old order. It suggests that Africa will no longer be a passive recipient of aid, but an active architect of its own alliances. Whether the U.S. responds with hostility containment or cautious engagement remains to be seen. But one thing is undeniable: Burkina Faso's gamble with India has forced the world to confront a new reality. Africa is awake, and it is no longer content with dependency. History often turns not on the grand speeches, but on whether promises find life in the streets and villages. The pact between Burkina Faso and India is one such turning point. It is more than an oil contract. It is more than a headline number. It is a gamble with the future itself. If the billions pledged give rise to factories, jobs, and steady power, then the story of Burkina Faso will echo as proof that Africa can stand tall on its own terms. A welder in Koudougou, a farmer in Kaya, or a student in Bobo Dioulasso will feel the change not in rhetoric, but in the rhythms of their daily lives. This is the bright future, the one where sovereignty is not just a slogan, but a lived reality. But we must also face the shadow. If corruption seeps in, if the profits vanish abroad, if the transfer of knowledge remains ink on paper, then this moment will collapse into betrayal. The world will point and say, "See, Africa cannot govern itself. See, they squander every chance." That failure would not belong only to Burkina Faso. It would become a weapon used against the entire continent. That is why vigilance matters. The success of this pact will depend not only on the leaders who signed it, but on the people who demand transparency, accountability, and results. History has little mercy for wasted opportunities. And make no mistake, the eyes of the world are watching. From Washington to Beijing, from Paris to New Delhi, power brokers are recalculating. Some fear the spread of sovereignty like wildfire. Others see opportunity in new alliances. But the decision of what this pact becomes belongs not to them, it belongs to Africa. So I leave you with this question. Do you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré's national reform strategies are truly delivering change? Or do you think another leader must one day carry this vision forward? Your answer matters because the story of Burkina Faso is not written in isolation. It is tied to the destiny of a continent long underestimated, now awakening. Please share this video if you feel you are among the first to witness and support President Ibrahim Traoré. And subscribe if you believe the truth is more important than the headlines, because together we can make sure the story of Africa is written not in the capitals of others, but in the voices of its own people.